The vast galactic council chamber stretched before Ambassador Sarah Chen like a cosmic amphitheater of judgment. Towering bioarchitectural walls curved upward into shadows, while representatives from 47 different species occupied their designated spaces in a careful hierarchy of power and prestige. The humans, predictably, had been assigned seats in the furthest corner, barely visible from the central podium. Sarah's footsteps echoed against the crystalline floor as she approached the speaking platform, each step amplified by the chamber's acoustics designed to carry voices across species with radically different hearing ranges. Around her, the assembled delegates represented millions of years of combined evolutionary development. The Zephyrians floated in their null gravity bubbles, their gossamer wings catching the chamber's bioluminescent lighting. The Chronari delegation sat rigid in their ceremonial armor, each piece a work of art forged in the fires of 1,000 conquered worlds. The ethereals barely maintained physical form, their translucent bodies shifting like living aurora. Humanity had been granted council membership only 3 months ago, a probationary status that everyone understood was more political courtesy than genuine recognition. The chittering began before Sarah even reached the podium. Low and musical from the Zephyrian delegation, it was their species' equivalent of dismissive laughter. The sound rippled outward as other species joined in their own expressions of amusement. The Corvin representatives' gill slits fluttered rapidly, while the crystalline mystics resonated with harmonic frequencies that translated as barely contained mirth. "The primitive species wishes to address the council," hissed Ambassador Thexkar of the Serpentine Coalition, his forked tongue tasting the air with theatrical disdain. "How delightfully quaint." Sarah felt the weight of 47 civilizations staring down at her, but she maintained perfect diplomatic composure. The universal translator nested in her ear converted the various alien languages into English, though it couldn't filter out the layers of condescension that seemed to drip from every word. Behind her, Dr. Marcus Webb shifted nervously in his seat among the human delegation. As Earth's foremost xenolinguist, he'd spent the last decade cataloging every scrap of alien language they'd encountered. His tablet displayed reams of linguistic data that most of the council would dismiss as the fumbling attempts of a backward species to understand their betters. "Honored representatives," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's perfect acoustics. "Humanity comes before this council not as supplicants seeking your approval, but as contributors ready to add our unique perspectives and capabilities to—" "Capabilities?" The interruption boomed across the chamber from Commander Valthar, the Chronari military attaché. His species stood nearly 3 meters tall, their chitinous armor having evolved through millions of years of constant warfare. Each piece of his ceremonial battle gear told the story of conquests that spanned galaxies. Pray tell, what capabilities could a species barely capable of escaping their own gravity well possibly possess that would interest civilizations such as ours? The laughter intensified, becoming a symphony of alien amusement that made Sarah's skin crawl. She could see the dismissal in their eyes, or eye equivalents, the certainty that humanity was nothing more than an amusing curiosity soon to be forgotten. "Your entire species has existed for what, 200,000 years?" Velthar continued, his voice dripping with the authority of eons. "My people, the Chronari, have waged war among the stars for over 2 million years. We have conquered systems while your ancestors were still discovering fire. The ethereals were manipulating quantum fields and folding spacetime before your sun had even ignited from cosmic dust." He gestured broadly at the assembled council, his armor plates rattling what humans had learned was the Chronari equivalent of contemptuous laughter. The Zephyrians were composing stellar symphonies when your world was still molten rock. The Serpentine Coalition had mapped dimensional gateways across 3 galaxy clusters while Earth was nothing but space debris. So, I ask again, what could you primitive mammals possibly offer to beings such as us? The chamber fell silent except for the subtle sounds of alien breathing, energy field fluctuations, and the soft hum of life support systems accommodating dozens of different atmospheric requirements. Sarah could feel the weight of their expectation, their certainty that she would stumble, that humanity would prove itself as inadequate as they all believed. She took a deep breath, drawing on every diplomatic training session, every preparation for this moment. This was why they'd sent her, not just for her skills as an ambassador, but for her ability to remain calm under the most crushing pressure. "We offer something you've all lost," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. The alien sounds of amusement died away completely, replaced by curious murmurs and the subtle shifts that indicated she'd finally captured their attention. "And what is that, little mammal?" asked Prime Ethereal Zikthara, her translucent form shimmering with colors that the universal translator suggested indicated mild amusement mixed with genuine curiosity. Sarah looked out at the assembled might of galactic civilization, at beings who could manipulate matter and energy in ways humanity could barely comprehend, who had built empires spanning light years while humans were still learning to forge bronze. "Memory," she replied. 3 days earlier, in the cramped quarters of the human diplomatic vessel Endeavour, Dr. Marcus Webb hunched over his workstation, surrounded by towers of data tablets and empty coffee cups. The ship's recycled air carried the faint metallic taste of long-term space travel, but Marcus barely noticed. He'd been working for 18 hours straight on his obsession, mapping the linguistic relationships between the various species in the Galactic Council. It was painstaking work that most of his colleagues considered career suicide. The major species jealously guarded their ancient languages, considering them sacred relics too holy to share with inferior races like humanity. But Marcus had learned patience during his years studying dead Earth languages. He understood that sometimes the most important discoveries came from fragments, scraps of overheard conversations, partially corrupted data files, and the occasional drunk alien who let something slip in a bar on Centauri Station. His neural implant throbbed with fatigue as he processed another batch of linguistic data. The universal translator could handle modern galactic standard and its contemporary dialects, but it failed completely when confronted with archaic forms. That's where Marcus came in, methodically building a database of dead languages from scattered pieces. The breakthrough came at 0347 ship time, when he was analyzing a recording from yesterday's Zephyrian delegation meeting. Ambassador Keyleth had been arguing with her aide in what the universal translator had marked as archaic Zephyrian dialect, translation unavailable. The argument had been heated, with both Zephyrians switching into increasingly ancient forms of their language as emotions ran high. Marcus played the recording for the 100th time, his pattern recognition software running linguistic analysis algorithms. Then he saw it, a verb conjugation that made him sit up straight in his chair. The grammatical structure was impossible. It belonged to a completely different linguistic family from modern Zephyrian. Heart pounding, he pulled up his files on ancient Chronari military commands, fragments he'd painstakingly gleaned from archaeological reports and military histories. There it was again, buried in a 10,000-year-old battle hymn. The same impossible structure. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, his coffee growing cold as he worked through the night with growing excitement and disbelief. By morning, he had identified 17 dead alien languages that shared the same fundamental grammatical DNA. Languages that should have been completely unrelated were connected by roots that predated recorded galactic history. But that wasn't the shocking part that made his hands shake as he stared at the holographic display. The shocking part was that he recognized the root language. It was staring him in the face from his own linguistic database. A language that predated all of human civilization, all of human history, all of human memory. Proto-Indo-European. Not exactly, but close enough that the similarities were undeniable. The mathematical probability was astronomical. Whoever had spoken the parent language of the galaxy's ancient tongues had also somehow given rise to Sanskrit, Latin, Germanic, and Celtic languages on Earth. Marcus stared at his screen, watching the linguistic trees branch and merge in patterns that rewrote everything he thought he knew about galactic history. Either this was the most incredible coincidence in the history of the universe, or humanity wasn't as alone as they'd thought. Or perhaps they'd never been alone at all.
Memory, Sarah repeated, her voice cutting through the council chamber's acoustics like a blade through silk. The word hung in the air, translated simultaneously into 47 different languages, yet somehow carrying the same weight in each one. The universal translator's pause was infinitesimal, but Marcus caught it from his position in the human delegation. Some concepts were so fundamentally alien to the council species that even their advanced translation matrix struggled to find proper equivalents. The idea of collective ancestral memory, the notion that an entire species could preserve something their more advanced neighbors had lost, was apparently one of them. Prime ethereal Zikthara's translucent form flickered through a spectrum of colors that Marcus had learned indicated deep confusion mixed with unwilling curiosity. "Explain yourself, human," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the chamber's crystalline walls resonate softly. Sarah nodded to Marcus, who stood on unsteady legs and activated his holo projector with hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion and caffeine. The air above the central dais shimmered with electromagnetic interference, then resolved into a complex three-dimensional linguistic tree diagram that towered above the assembled delegates like a monument to forgotten knowledge. 3 days ago, we made a discovery that should be impossible, Marcus began, his academic training helping him override the intimidation of addressing beings who had mastered sciences humanity could barely comprehend. We found linguistic connections between your species' ancient languages, connections that mathematically should not exist. The holographic diagram expanded, its branches growing more complex as probability matrices and statistical analyses filled the air around it. Red connection lines began linking seemingly unrelated alien scripts, while blue probability indicators showed mathematical relationships that made several ambassadors lean forward in their seats with genuine interest for the first time. The Zephyrian High Liturgical language shares 47% of its core grammatical structure with ancient Chronari battle cant, Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger as he fell into the familiar rhythm of academic presentation. Both languages share root morphemes with the ethereal meditation hymns. The Serpentine sacred texts contain verb conjugations identical to pre-diaspora mystic resonance patterns. He gestured, and probability calculations cascaded through the hologram like a waterfall of numbers. The statistical probability of this occurring through natural linguistic evolution is approximately 1 in 14 trillion. "Impossible!" interrupted Archmage Thisara of the Mystic Collective, her crystalline form resonating with harmonic frequencies that Marcus's implant registered as profound shock. "The High Liturgical tongue has been dead for 50,000 years. My people barely remember fragments of it, preserved only in our most sacred ceremonies. Even our greatest scholars require meditation crystals to parse its meanings." "Exactly," said Marcus, his excitement finally overriding his nervousness. "These languages died before your species achieved interstellar flight. They're archaeological artifacts, preserved only in religious texts and ancient monuments. But we can read them." He paused, letting the implications settle over the chamber like a blanket of silence. "Not only can we read them, we can speak them."
"Prove it!" Commander Velthar's voice boomed across the chamber, his chitinous plates rattling with what Marcus had learned was the Chronari equivalent of angry, dismissive laughter.
The sound echoed off the bioarchitectural walls like armor clashing in ancient battlefields. If you truly claim to speak our ancestor tongue, then speak it, little mammal. The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown bound before the assembled might of galactic civilization. Marcus felt the weight of 47 species' attention focused on him with laser intensity. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the chamber's perfectly controlled atmosphere. Sarah looked at Marcus, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes conveying both confidence and concern. They'd known this moment would come, but Marcus had hoped for more time to prepare, more opportunities to practice the pronunciation of languages that had never been meant for human vocal cords. "Which would you prefer?" Marcus asked, his voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Perhaps a demonstration of your battle cant? Or would the ethereal delegation prefer to hear some of their meditation hymns? I could recite Zephyrian high liturgical verses, or perhaps some serpentine sacred texts." "You cannot know the battle cant," Velthar snarled, rising to his full 3-meter height, his ceremonial armor gleaming under the chamber's bioluminescent lighting. "It died with the Kronar Military Academy 10,000 years ago. Not even our own scholars can decipher more than fragments. The pronunciation alone requires vocal structures that your primitive throat cannot." Marcus began to speak. The words that emerged from his mouth were harsh and guttural, filled with the sound of clashing metal and the fury of ancient warfare. They carried the weight of eons, the echo of battles fought among distant stars before Earth's continents had finished forming. The universal translator fell completely silent. These words were too old, too pure, too sacred for its databases to recognize. But around the chamber, something extraordinary happened. Commander Velthar's armor plates stopped rattling. His 4 compound eyes widened simultaneously, focusing on Marcus with an intensity that made the human linguist's skin crawl with primal recognition. Other Kronari in the delegation began to stand, their ceremonial battle gear clanking as they rose in movements that seemed involuntary, almost ritualistic. Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger and more confident as he recited what his analysis had suggested was a formal military oath of allegiance. The words felt strange on his tongue, alien yet familiar, as if his mouth had been shaped specifically to speak them. Each syllable resonated through the chamber with power that seemed to come from the very foundations of galactic civilization. When he finished, the silence stretched for nearly a full minute. The only sounds were the soft hum of life support systems and the barely audible breathing of dozens of different species holding their collective breath. Then Commander Velthar dropped to one knee, his massive form hitting the crystalline floor with a sound like thunder. "By the shattered moons of Kronar," he whispered, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's perfect acoustics, each word heavy with reverence and shock. "You speak the old tongue, the tongue of our warfathers, the language of the first conquest. How is this possible?" The chamber erupted into controlled chaos as Marcus continued his linguistic demonstration. Representatives from a dozen species began urgent conversations in their native tongues, their various translators creating a symphony of overlapping voices that spoke of shock, disbelief, and growing wonder. Some demanded immediate explanations, while others accused the humans of elaborate technological deception. But Marcus wasn't finished. He turned to face the ethereal delegation, his throat already raw from the harsh consonants of Kronari battle cant. Drawing upon weeks of practice with reconstructed pronunciation guides, he began to speak in the flowing, melodic tones that his research suggested belonged to their ancient meditation practices. The words seemed to float through the chamber's atmosphere like living music, each syllable carrying harmonics that resonated in frequencies beyond normal hearing. Prime ethereal Zyxthara's translucent form began to glow with colors Marcus had never witnessed before, deep purples and golds that seemed to emanate from her very essence. Other ethereals in the delegation flickered in sympathetic response, their forms becoming more solid, more present, as if the ancient words were calling them back from whatever dimensional space they normally occupied. Without pause, Marcus switched to Zephyrian High Liturgical, his voice taking on the complex tonal patterns that required precise control of breath and pitch. The sacred verses flowed from his lips with surprising ease, as if the words themselves were guiding his pronunciation. Half the Zephyrian delegation began to weep, an action that involved their throat sacs inflating and deflating in rapid succession, while producing harmonious keening sounds that filled the chamber with haunting beauty. By the time he'd cycled through fragments of 8 different ancient languages, including samples of serpentine sacred texts and mystic deep resonance patterns, the chamber had fallen into a profound silence that felt almost religious in its intensity. Ambassador Sarah Chen watched the aftermath with a mixture of pride and apprehension. The assembled representatives of galactic civilization, these beings who had dismissed humanity as primitive upstarts mere hours ago, now stared at Marcus with expressions that ranged from reverence to fear. "How?" whispered Archmage Thyssara, her crystalline form dim with what Marcus was learning to recognize as deep spiritual awe. "How do you know the deep resonance tongue? It has been lost to us for 30,000 years. Even our most sacred meditation crystals can only preserve fragments, echoes of what once was." "This changes everything," Prime Ethereal Zyxthara said, her form now a soft blue that Marcus had learned indicated profound contemplation mixed with growing respect. "If what you demonstrate is true, if humanity has somehow preserved the root language of our ancestors, then you are not the primitive species we believed you to be." "We never claimed to be primitive," Sarah replied carefully, stepping forward to stand beside Marcus. "We claimed to be different. We claimed to offer something you had lost." Marcus looked out at the assembled representatives, these beings who commanded technologies that could reshape matter and energy, who had built empires spanning light years while humans were still learning to work bronze. Yet now they hung on his every word like students before a master. "Because," he said quietly, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber, "we never forgot." Still here, Prime Ethereal Zyxthara's translucent form flickered rapidly through colors that the Universal Translator marked as extreme agitation, possible existential terror. The very air around her seemed to vibrate with frequencies that made several species' sensory organs recoil instinctively. Marcus pulled up another holographic display, this one showing detailed stellar cartography data compiled from every major galactic survey over the past 50,000 years. The three-dimensional star map filled the chamber's central space, rotating slowly to show density patterns and energy signatures across local space. "We've been analyzing the distribution patterns of every species that shares these proto-galactic linguistic markers," Marcus explained, his voice taking on the careful precision of a scientist presenting data that could rewrite the foundation of galactic civilization. "There's a clear epicenter, a mathematical point of origin from which all the language families radiated outward in predictable waves." The display zoomed in with mechanical precision, focusing on a seemingly empty section of space near the galactic core. But as the resolution increased and sensor data from multiple sources overlaid the region, a faint signature became visible, something that registered on gravimetric sensors, energy detectors, and quantum field monitors but couldn't be clearly identified by any known technology. "The Forbidden Zone," breathed Commander Velthar, his massive form suddenly seeming smaller, more vulnerable. His armor plates had stopped their usual subtle movement, locked in what Marcus recognized as the Chronari equivalent of paralyzing fear. "You're pointing directly to the Forbidden Zone." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the chamber's environmental systems seemed to quiet, as if the very technology was holding its breath. Sarah stepped forward, her diplomatic training helping her maintain composure despite the weight of the moment. "What do you know about it?" Nothing, Velthar replied too quickly, his voice carrying undertones that suggested the opposite. No one speaks of the Forbidden Zone. It has always been forbidden. Since before the Council was formed, since before any of our races achieved interstellar flight, since before recorded galactic history began. But you know it's there, Marcus observed, studying the faces and face equivalents of the assembled delegates. All of you know exactly where it is, even though it's not marked on any official star charts, even though no one talks about it openly, even though there are no treaties or laws specifically forbidding travel there, you all know its precise coordinates. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as representatives from different species realized he was absolutely correct. The Forbidden Zone was like a collective blind spot, present in all their racial memories but never discussed, never explored, never even officially acknowledged to exist. "I have dreams," Archmage Thesara admitted quietly, her crystalline form dimming to barely visible transparency. "Dreams of great cities floating in the void between stars. Dreams of voices calling in languages I almost understand, almost remember. All of my people have these dreams, generation after generation, but we do not speak of them. We are afraid to speak of them." "The Zephyrian deep memory cycles," added Ambassador Pelith, her throat sacs contracting with what Marcus now recognized as deep anxiety. "They're considered sacred myths, forbidden to discuss with outsiders. They speak of the calling voices that summoned our ancestors to the stars, voices that still echo in the darkness between worlds." One by one, representatives began to share similar stories with growing unease. Ancient myths preserved in secret texts, racial memories passed down through genetic conditioning, shared dreams that all pointed to the same impossible conclusion. 6 months later, the Joint Expedition Fleet hung in space at the edge of the Forbidden Zone like a constellation of hope and terror. 12 ships representing every major species in the Galactic Council formed a careful formation, with humanity's diplomatic vessel Endeavor positioned at the center, no longer relegated to the periphery, but recognized as the key to unlocking galactic history. Dr. Marcus Webb stood on the bridge, his linguistic databases now expanded with sacred fragments from every species' most closely guarded archives. What he'd discovered in the intervening months had only strengthened their hypothesis. The proto-galactic language wasn't just similar to human linguistic roots. It was identical in ways that suggested direct contact, direct inheritance across impossible spans of time. The space around them felt different here, charged with potential that made every sensor array hum with barely contained energy. This close to the Forbidden Zone, even the most advanced ship's navigation systems seemed to hesitate, as if their programming contained genetic memories of avoidance. "Long-range sensors are detecting massive artificial structures," reported Commander Velthar from the Krenari battleship Warfather's Edge, his voice carrying across the comm channels with barely suppressed awe. "They're enormous, larger than anything in our databases. And by the shattered moons, they're beautiful beyond description." On the main view screen, shapes began to resolve out of the cosmic background radiation, like dreams becoming reality. Cities, not built on planets or carved from asteroids, but floating free in the void, sustained by technology that made current galactic civilization look like crude stone tools fashioned by children. Crystalline spires twisted through impossible geometries, while energy fields danced between structures in patterns that hurt to perceive directly. "By the deep resonance," whispered Archmage Thesara over the communication array, her voice trembling with spiritual recognition. "They're still inhabited. I'm reading life signs, millions of them. The quantum signatures are. They're calling to us." Sarah stepped forward to the communications console, her hands steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "Open a channel on all frequencies, broadcast on every spectrum we can generate." The communication array activated, sending signals into the ancient silence of the Forbidden Zone. For a heartbeat that seemed to last eternities, there was nothing but the background whisper of cosmic radiation.
Then a voice responded. It spoke in the proto-galactic tongue, the root language that had given birth to every species' ancient words. But this wasn't the fragmented, corrupted version that Marcus had painstakingly reconstructed from archaeological evidence and religious texts. This was the language as it was meant to be spoken, pure, complete, alive with power that resonated in the bones of every species listening. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he listened, understanding every nuance, every harmonic. The words carried the weight of 50,000 years of patient waiting. "Welcome home, children of the scattering," the voice said, and it carried frequencies that resonated in the genetic memory of every being in the fleet. "We have been waiting for you to remember who you are." The view screen shimmered with energy patterns that defied comprehension, then resolved into the image of a figure that was recognizably humanoid in basic structure, but clearly other. Ancient beyond measure, with eyes that held the accumulated wisdom of civilizations, the being radiated a presence that made every species' ancestral memories sing in recognition. "We are the predecessors," the figure continued, its voice carrying harmonics that seemed to speak directly to their souls.